Oi, como vai? Tudo bem com você? Welcome back to Brazilian Portuguese Lessons with Professor Jason. Today I'm going to present on the topic of verb conjugations and sort of give an overview of the verbal system in Brazilian Portuguese. Now I know talking about verb conjugations is something that scares many of you language learners. However, learning how and why verbs change forms is crucial to speaking and understanding Brazilian Portuguese. All right? Now, Brazilian Portuguese, like many languages, uses different verb tenses and changes the endings of the verbs to indicate whether conditions or actions are occurring in the present, the past, or the future. And these verb tenses and verb changes also help to indicate whether or not an action is customary or habitual, ongoing or in progress, or completed. All right? So, I'm going to give an overview, like I said, of the Portuguese verb system, and I'm going to illustrate using 5 specific tenses, which I think are sufficient to handle most conversational situations, all right? Now, I'm not going to provide detailed conjugation charts for each of the tenses, except for the present tense, as you'll see in a moment, okay? But if you do pay close attention to the presentation, you should be able to figure out the patterns and see how the endings would be. And at some point in the future, I promise, I'll upload more detailed lessons on each of these tenses. All right? So I'm going to use the whiteboard and some printouts that I've prepared to give you an overview of the verb conjugation system in Brazilian Portuguese. Okay? So here we go. Okay, I'd like to begin by pointing out that in Portuguese you have 3 main classes or types of verbs. Verbs that end in AR, like falar, estudar, morar. Verbs ending in ER, such as comer, vender, beber, and verbs ending in IR, such as these: assistir, dormir, and partir. Okay? Now these unconjugated forms are called the infinitives, and infinitives have 2 parts, a stem and an ending, as we can see here. Here you can see the infinitives separated into their stems and their endings, all right? Conjugation involves removing the infinitive endings and adding the endings to reflect 2 important things. Number 1, what tense we're using, and number 2, which subject the verb goes with. All right? So before we move on, I'd like to review the subject pronouns in Brazilian Portuguese. These are the subjects in Brazilian Portuguese, the subject pronouns. For I, it's eu, you singular, você, he is ele, she, ela, we, nós, you guys, or the you plural, is vocês, and they is eles if it's men, and elas if it's a group of women. All right, that's just a review of the subject pronouns because the verbs change depending on which subject we're conjugating for. All right, now we're looking at some examples of sentences that use verbs in the present tense. The present tense in Brazilian Portuguese is used to describe what a person usually or always does, to narrate actions or describe conditions occurring in the present, and even to speak of the immediate future. All right? Look at these examples. Eu estudo português na faculdade. I study Portuguese at the university. Ele mora na França agora. He is living in France now. Você vende sapatos nessa loja? Do you sell shoes in that store? Vocês sempre bebem cerveja? Do you guys always drink beer? Bebemos, sim. Yes, we do. Ela assiste Seinfeld toda noite. She watches Seinfeld every night. Amanhã partimos às 7. Tomorrow we leave at 7. In other words, here we see that immediate future use of the present. Amanhã partimos às 7. Tomorrow we leave, or we will leave, at 7. The next important verb tense that I want to talk about in Brazilian Portuguese would be the simple past. The simple past is used to refer to completed actions in the past, to say what somebody did. Okay? Now here are some examples. Eu estudei muito ontem. I studied a lot yesterday. It's a completed action in the past. Ele morou 3 anos na Inglaterra. He lived for 3 years in England, literally. In other words, even though it took 3 years, I'm referring to it as a completed action. Ele morou 3 anos na Inglaterra. Você vendeu seu carro? Did you sell your car? Vendi sim. I sold it, yes. Vendi sim. Nós dormimos até tarde. We slept until late. We slept in. Completed act in the past. Eles assistiram filme. Eles assistiram filme. They watched a movie. Another completed action in the past. Now in Brazilian Portuguese, there's another verb tense to talk about actions in the past that are in progress, or in other words, not completed actions, but ongoing background actions or conditions, or to indicate that an activity was repeated several times in the past. For example, to say what someone used to do or would always do. Okay, and this tense is called the imperfect. All right. Here are some examples of how the imperfect is formed and used. Right. Ela sempre falava muito. This might be something like, she used to talk a lot, or she would always talk a lot. It's not a completed action in the past, it's a reiterated, reoccurring action in the past. Second example, nós morávamos em Brasília. We used to live in Brasília. Eles comiam juntos toda noite. They used to, or they would eat together every night. Eu vendia sapatos nessa loja. I sold shoes at that store. I'm not being precise as to how long, and I'm not referring to it as a completed action. It's an ongoing action in the past. Eu vendia sapatos nessa loja. I used to sell shoes at that store. Você dormia nesse quarto? Did you used to sleep in that room? Você dormia nesse quarto? Or, ela assistia Lost toda terça-feira. She used to, or she would watch Lost every Tuesday. So again, the imperfect is different from the simple past in that we're describing or we're narrating actions that recurred or that were ongoing or in progress in the past instead of narrating completed actions. Okay? People are always asking me, what's the easiest way to conjugate verbs in the future, to talk about future events in Brazilian Portuguese? The easiest and the most common way among native speakers is to use the verb ir, which means to go, plus another verb, all right? So in this construction, we have the verb ir, to go, plus another verb as a simple way to say what someone is going to do at some point in the future. Its usage is the same as when we in English say something like, that person is going to do something, all right? It's the simplest and most common way to speak about future actions in Brazilian Portuguese. So here are some examples of how to use this structure to talk about the future. Remember, you conjugate the verb ir in the present tense, and then you add a second verb in the infinitive. Examples. Eu vou ler esse romance. I am going to read that novel. Ela vai estudar antes da prova. She is going to study before the quiz or the test. Nós vamos comer às 8. We are going to eat at 8 o'clock. Vocês vão chegar amanhã? Are you guys going to arrive tomorrow? Você vai assistir esse jogo? Are you going to watch that game? And the person might respond, vou sim. Okay? So again, we're conjugating ir in the present tense, vou, vai, vamos, vão, and then we're adding a verb immediately in the infinitive to say what somebody is going to do, very similar to the English I am going to, you are going to, etc. The last of the 5 very common verb tenses that I want to talk about today is called the present progressive. Now this construction uses the verb estar conjugated in the present tense plus the present participle form, like the ing form in English, to say what someone is doing right now. So it indicates an action that is in progress in the present. Its usage is the same as the corresponding tense in English, as you can see from the examples. So, here are some examples of how the present progressive is formed and used in Brazilian Portuguese. Examples. Eu estou estudando francês. I am studying French. It could mean right now or currently. Estamos assistindo vídeo. We are watching a video. Right at this moment, we are watching a video. Ela está vendendo peixe na praia. She is selling fish at the beach or on the beach as we speak. Vocês estão dormindo ainda? Are you guys still sleeping right now? Vocês estão dormindo ainda? Are you still sleeping at this moment? And then a short dialogue. O que você está fazendo? What are you doing? O que você está fazendo? Estou cozinhando. So you know when you call someone on their cell phone and you ask, hey, what are you up to right now? What are you doing right now? You would use this question. O que você está fazendo? And the person would tell you what they're doing. Estou cozinhando. Estou assistindo TV, por exemplo. Now I want to talk about one more thing before we finish up this lesson, this overview of Brazilian verbs. That's the fact that you don't always conjugate all the verbs in a sentence or phrase. For example, when you have structures that use two verbs, the second is usually left unconjugated. Now we just saw this with the future using ir, to go. But notice when I say, ela vai comer depois. She is going to eat later. I don't conjugate the second verb, okay? Ela vai comer depois. The first verb is conjugated, second one isn't. Some other very common two-verb combinations in Brazilian Portuguese include what you're seeing on this sheet here. The verb querer, to say that you want to do something. The verb gostar de, plus a verb, to say that you like to do something. Precisar, plus a verb, to say that you need to do something. And ter que, plus a verb, to say that you have to do something. All these usages are similar to what we have in English, but notice in the examples that I'm going to read now that the second verb is left in the infinitive. So, he wants to sleep, ele quer dormir. I like to read, eu gosto de ler. You need to study, você precisa estudar. We have to leave, nós temos que partir. Speaking of which, our time is up and we do have to leave. Nós temos que partir. Okay, so thank you for watching. My intention today was just to provide an overview of the Brazilian verb system, to show you examples of some of those key tenses. Hopefully I was successful and this was beneficial information for you. And you'll come back and take some more lessons from Professor Jason as you continue to learn Brazilian Portuguese. Até logo. Tchau.